It is a joy to be here. I appreciate you guys having me here to share stories on my heart and my journey a little bit. I live in the Great White North, just a little bit north of here in Minneapolis. I actually live in St. Paul, which makes it's a big deal if you say that you're from Minneapolis, but you're really from St. Paul. St. Paul is the smaller of the twins. Minneapolis is 1 million some plus, and the whole metro is 3 million, and St. Paul's like 200,000. So it's a quirky town that I say knows itself. We have some great storytellers out of there. F. Scott Fitzgerald and other, authors of note, and it's a fun place. When people move there, though, I advise them. My advice to anyone who moves to Minnesota is you have to acknowledge winter. You have to acknowledge it. You have to say, "Sir, I understand that you are trying to kill me." And once you've recognized that about winter and where we're from, then you can settle into something almost like hibernation. And I just read a beautiful book called Wintering, and how you let yourself, so we're pros at it up there, and I feel sorry for people who are still in some warmer climes because you just have, the thing just keeps going. But for us, we actually have to hibernate, so it's good. So I try to make sense because I'm in the middle. I've come out of hibernation to come share with you here, and but I'm glad to be here. I wanted to tell you some stories about what my husband and I, Troy, have experienced in planting an intentional community at the intersection of art and faith in St. Paul, inspired by the Art House in Nashville. And in 2003, Troy and I made our way to work on a record with Charlie Peacock. And Charlie Peacock, if you don't know that name, he's a producer and a songwriter and the most creative person I've ever met. I was listening to him once. He was on the phone, and he was saying, yes, I could do that. Yep, I could do that. And yeah, we'll set it up. And he hung up the phone and he said, they've asked me to make a film, a documentary. And I said, oh, I didn't know that you made films. And he said, well, I don't, but now now I do, apparently, just committed to it. But I learned a lot of things from Charlie. He is exceedingly creative, one of those people that just kind of can't help themselves. And I learned to not edit myself. I learned about the generative life. I learned about creative community for the common good. He and his wife, Andy, were just inspirational to Troy and I at such a level. So there were a lot of places in Nashville when I was doing music. At this point, I was kind of in the middle of CCM. I was on the radio and doing in the middle of all those things. I had come out with my first record, and right away had kind of easy, songs. The songs were doing well, and I thought, oh, this is how that happens. You make a song, and then they play it, and that's just how that goes. And immediately I was kind of confronted with a lot of questions about, but what does it mean to be an artist in the world, and what shape does this take with you or your family? I had a young child at the time. I now have 3 not so young children, and I thought, what is my role? So I could go a lot of places in Nashville, and I could learn about how to exceed in business and how to build, better marketing and do all these kinds of things. But the Art House in Nashville was where we went to talk about what does it mean to be an artist in the world? What's actually happening there? What is the role of the contemplative? How can the disposition of the artist benefit the people around them? How are we not just sort of weird and broken and ruminating all the time in ways that feel sometimes crazy and going in all these offshoots? How can we look at ourselves and the way we were made as we're here, we're part of this body, and we have a job, we have a role that we play in this community, and that's where we talked about it. We talked about advocacy and how to advocate and what it might look like to be those kinds of people in the world. So artists have a disposition, I think, and I know that in a room like this we have every kind of personality, so it's not just to put us all in another type of box, but The artists that I tend to hang around with are really comfortable with questions. They, in fact, need to ask questions. They need to know that that's okay without being like seen as something scary. They're okay with mystery. They have a tremendous capacity for wonder. They are ruminators. I remember Charlie telling me once, not everyone does that, what you do. No one ruminates all day long and all night. Like, I don't stop. I don't know about you, but I'm like, it's navel gazing at its best, and I'm doing that almost at all times. And Charlie said some days a guy gets in his cab of his truck after a really long day's work, and he's made to do other things, and he pops in this record, Fireflies and Songs, which is about you and your marriage, and maybe by the time he gets home, he has language to speak to his wife, to say, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I got mad the other night, and I went behind this mask, and I wasn't really seeing you. And maybe there's some kind of element. Maybe you've named something for someone. Maybe you create an image, and because we are anointed to hear truth, it resonates in someone, and it gives them a sense of pause, maybe a moment of Sabbath. Abraham Heschel says that these moments are cathedrals built in time. So we have these moments, we have these things to offer in the congregation. So I'd love to talk about what that looks like and what that's looked like at the Art House. So I'll tell you first, I did 2 records at the Art House in Nashville. I've done 14 records in my 25 years of doing music. And we pulled in, and Charlie and Andy live in this 100-year-old church that they've renovated. And the sanctuary is like this giant living room. And they have a big, huge table, and then they have a studio there. And it's kind of the studio life. It's just the life they're in. They're just in this river. And what they've done with the original Art House is they just opened their lives up to other people. Hey, we're going to be going down this river if you want to come along and journey with us. So that it wasn't like programs based. It wasn't anything like that. But occasionally they would just have someone come speak. When Bono was trying to talk to leaders and wanting to find artists and leaders to speak on the things he was talking about poverty and debt reduction in Africa and the things that the One campaign was doing. They met at Charlie's in that living room to talk to other artists and say, how might we all come in on this conversation and think about our advocacy and things like that. We'd also you'd be at a meal with just a really broad range of folks, doctors, a restaurant owner, or any kind of person. And it wasn't scripted, it was just hospitality and food and those kinds of things. But we were also making music there. He had a studio there, and that was the heart of what we were doing. So my husband and I would go home to St. Paul and wonder, it stuck with us, this space that you might create. We were going out and we were having all these incredible experiences. Most of us go to church on a Sunday in one church, and I think that's wonderful to have that loyalty and that sense of community. But we were traveling, we were on the road, and we were in a Prevost bus with our family, and we were going to every kind of church you can imagine: small churches, large churches, mega churches. Catholic, Episcopal, Baptist, Lutheran, Assemblies of God. We were in every kind of space you can think of. I think pastors should come on the road with us and see what we saw. It's fascinating. You'd be in a space, and I grew up AG, so I had my own context, and I'm just out seeing in these. The AG puts a very high emphasis on autonomy, and so I thought, well, this is who we are. Well, that's what my home congregation was like, and then I went out and I'm like, whoa, this is the Wild West out here. It was a lot of different things. It was a whole lot of different things. Because I was coming in with music, I think the feeling in general was just a very broad welcome for me. I love that song that you wrote. It really moved me. It met me in a time when I was in this heavy, hard place. And the assumption then is you and I must think alike. And so we move right into a different kind of place, a different kind of conversation that I came to really value. We're talking about our families and our lives, and I came to see the value of this body of Christ, broad and wide. And I wanted to have a way, how do we have space like this? Because we would have such interesting conversations with people. It was always like the dinner time, over coffee and hearing about people's hearts. Like everybody's out there just, they're trying to do good things with what they value, and they're, this crazy world. I picture Jesus drawing that line in the sand, and he looks up and he says, if anyone's an alien from outer space, you can make this call, If anyone's not a human being, you can make this call. And he's saying, you are all in the soup. You're all in it. We're all of us in the soup. And so I sometimes think I have moments with total strangers, where I intersect with somebody and they're going through something, and we're having this really wonderful, rich conversation. And it's just a little moment, of that, like treading in the soup, how are you doing? I'm doing all right, I've got this. And we're all just trying to, are you okay? We're coming in boats, or we're calling for a boat, and we're in this thing, and we're trying to help each other along. Sorry, that got off in a little weird tangent about soup that has boats in it. But, yeah. So Trey and I drove by one day this place. We had looked at 6 or 7 places, and we were going to buy with 5 different family groups, or 4 different family groups. We were going to buy this place together and have a commune and do this thing. And we had this older gentleman who had been in a commune at one point come, and he sat us down and he said, basically, Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this in Life Together, but if you make the community the thing, you'll ruin it. If you make community your goal, but if you have a mission and you're doing something in the world together, then you will find community. So we started thinking about what our mission was, and it was this. We wanted to be a part of this, and asked Charlie and Andy, could we start an art house up in St. Paul? The main banner that we all live under is Creative Community for the Common Good. It was important to Charlie that we were not affiliated with any specific church. It was going to be at the intersection of art and faith, and be creative community for the common good. And there was an art house in Dallas, an art house in Nashville, and then the art house up in St. Paul. And so we started dreaming about this place, and we thought, this is who's going to come, and this is how we're going to run this. And then just a whole different thing happened that fit our community. We found partners that lived on the street already, that were doing theater, and that had all kinds of people, had all kinds of ideas and things. And so we began to have just gathering times and getting together, holding community, and identifying what was kind of weird about us. Like, when we come like this as artists together in this room, what's the hunger? What is it? Try to name what made us unique, or what was sort of a common denominator in the room. And again, I found that there was no fear of mystery. Artists are okay holding mystery. You talked about that gray area. It's like, yeah, well, I'm okay with, I don't know. I can say that I don't know. I can hold tensions, because I think nothing is ever all one thing. We drink the cup every day, and in the cup is sorrow and joy, tragedy and beauty. And artists kind of like live in that space. They know that. They have this sense of that at all times. So I feel like our role is a little bit different than maybe a pastoral role. The pastors and the theologians are working with words. They're trying to craft a framework for us to understand the ineffable. The arts come in a little bit different way, I think, to understand the ineffable, the thing that has no words. And there are these experiences that we've had through the arts that have brought us with such tremendous humility to breakthrough and understanding and, understanding saving grace in incredible ways. So I saw that the artist has a role, and that is to tell the truth. And that comes in two ways. That's my very first note from Charlie was, don't edit yourself. What he meant by that was, now as artists, sometimes we're already in editing mode when we start. We start creating something and we begin editing. And he said, you can't be the editor and the creator. You have to be the champion of your own idea. You have to be like, this is the best idea I've ever had. And just, you have to be a cheerleader for it. And you can't edit yourself. But what he meant was, all of us, underneath sort of the lives we have, is this the life, or the life we're kind of projecting, is the life we're actually living, the one we're actually in. And a lot of times we have these barriers. For me, I had barriers to understanding the truth about myself. It's hard to tell ourselves the truth. It actually, I think, is a lifelong spiritual formation practice, telling yourself the truth. Now, growing up in a holiness movement, what that meant was, I've got this rascal, this terrible thing in me, and I have to be really truthful about how bad it gets. And that, for me anyway, this is just my own testimony, but turned into a very scourging experience of I'm going to have to get this out in a way of being to me it created an atmosphere of self-loathing and of this in this way. So when I say I'm trying to tell myself the truth, I'm trying to identify what's really happening at any given moment. And I will often be writing songs, and if I'm asking the question, if I start by saying, well, what's the faithful thing to say? I don't think that God is even asking me that. I think he's saying, I want you to bear witness to the human experience. Now, how do I know that this is permissible or even in the ballpark of what we should be doing? Because the psalmist, that's what he's doing. So the pastor and the theologian are working with words very carefully. And here's this artist, and it's a little bit more woolly. It's a little bit more wild. It's Davidic. It has a questioning element. It's Psalm 73 when Asaph says, Lord, the wicked look pretty happy to me. Their houses are huge. Their families are wonderful. All day long I wash my hands, and all I get is a punch in the gut. I don't understand it. I'm a brute beast before you. I can't teach right now. I'm not going to try to teach because I don't understand what's happening. And you want me to go into the sanctuary? I'll go into the sanctuary. And we don't know what he sees. But he comes out. Who have I in heaven but you? Who do I desire more than you? My heart, my strength, forever they fail me, but you are my portion and my strength. You're the strength of my life. I'm going to preach and say, it is good to be with God. It is good to be with him. So we have him reporting what he's seeing. These people are succeeding. If we don't bear witness to the whole thing, if we only sing about the uplift, the blessing, the things that are, positive, and we don't ever sing to the lament or speak or show lament and grief and the hardship of life, we lose credibility. We have to bear witness to the whole thing. I think we're seeing that in our conversations right now. I know in our town we're seeing that in our conversations around racial reconciliation. I have friends who, after we lived 2 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered, and we had lived there. We lived in St. Paul at the time, but we went over right when people were beginning to gather, and it was like the city was being squeezed. Lament was coming out everywhere. And we just Troy and I took 2 weeks, and the kids too, just going around. There were people sharing and speaking. I had friends calling me, taking me to lunch. And they were saying things to me they never felt like they could say before. And they were saying, this is how I have experienced this, So there was a reckoning. I thought I was a justice-minded person, but I was really just working with theories and constructs. Now I'm sitting with people in my community. I'm talking to a mother whose son was shot in the head, and she said he was murdered twice. He was killed, and then his character was smeared. And so we began having these conversations, and we're learning all these different things and having very difficult moments. We're hearing from people that have been doing this work for a very long time. And I found in that moment that it was the threshold of the arts. It can take you somewhere a little bit different than a talking head panel or just a front door conversation. And I was so moved by the art coming out of our community from every facet to reflect on and try to process what our community was going through. I was with Sho Baraka at that time, a little bit after, and he said, I'm being called divisive for talking about my experiences. And he was saying, and I just reflected that, if we don't bear witness to the whole thing, then we lose credibility. We have to be able to talk about the hard things. And so I saw right away that the art house, that we wanted to be able to have conversations that we weren't having, in church often. And the first time that really happened took shape shortly after we had opened. I was in Connecticut. I was in the town over from Newtown. I did music that night. That morning, they had a car to take me to LaGuardia Airport. And I was in the car, and on the news, the shooting at Sandy Hook is happening. And the driver is saying, this is right here. This is happening right here. That's the turnoff for Newtown right there. And I was in the car and just feeling the immediacy of this moment, and drove to the airport. And when we got to the airport, everyone was gathered around the monitors. And at this point, they're saying, we know confirmed one has died. And I thought, the tragedy of being those parents and not knowing, well, which one, and none of them knowing which one. I boarded the plane. This was before Wi-Fi on the plane, and so I didn't hear anything during the flight. When I landed, they were reporting 19 had been killed. My daughter at the time was in kindergarten, and I just drove straight to the school, and I got her out of the classroom and brought her home. But I was just very shaken. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. It was just several days, several weeks of, I'm not sure I or we have processed this, have grieved an entire classroom of young kids. And so we had this art house. We had just started, holding concerts, and we'd had some plays there and different things. And I called 5 artists. I called a cello player, a friend of mine who is in a theater, a dancer, a friend of mine, a songwriter, and a poet, a professor at a local university that was a poet. And I said, will you just reflect on this? You don't have to, I'm not giving them any instruction on how to. We had a common faith, but I wasn't saying anything about how they should address this. Will you just reflect on these events? And so the 5 of them came, and my friend Judy, who is an English professor, got up, and she'd written a poem about the cellist of Sarajevo, who played his song in the middle of bomb craters in Bosnia during the Bosnian War. And then Ben Rosenbusch got up, and he played a cello piece, and he had not talked with Judy, but he played the adagio that the cellist of Sarajevo played in the crater. And so there's something happening. We're in this moment, and there's just room to think about what had happened. There isn't anyone telling me how I should feel or how this fits, into our Holy Writ. There's no one rushing us along. We're just like, give me a minute. Just give me a minute. The next person got up, and it was my friend Vanessa, who's in theater, and at that time, she was in a one-woman show of I Am Anne Frank. So she did a portion of I Am Anne Frank that just brought the house down about the resiliency of the human spirit, and was beautiful. And then my friend who's a songwriter got up, and he wrote 2 compelling songs that left us in, again, carried us into a place of lament, allowed space for what we were doing there. And the last person to go was Kelly, and she was dancing at the Pantages Theater at the time, so she brought 2 of her backup dancers. And they started at the back of the room with a song, very slow, "Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me." And they moved up to the front in this grief, and then the song begins to pick up, and I don't even know what happened. By the end of it, we were on our feet, we were singing, we were even clapping, and something had transpired in all of us, and it was a space that we needed, that we hadn't found. Everyone was just sort of, let's move on. And I thought, this is the kind of space we want to provide. We often say, we used to host Bible studies, and they were done in a way like a rabbinic style. That just means the way that they would have unrolled the scroll of scripture would have been read, and then everyone would have kind of gone around and reflected on that scripture, and to really believe that it is living and that you'll hear from it. But it drew a lot of artists, because we would always say at the beginning, this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. And we would invite artists in, like, ask your questions. Feel free to ask what you're going to, what's on your mind and on your heart. Jesus came to be acquainted with what? He wanted to be acquainted with, pardon? Grief, for sure. He wanted to be acquainted with humanness, right? What it means to be human. So when we become less than human, or are not bearing witness in a way that takes in the whole of the human account, we're missing a part of what Jesus himself came to know. He came, and I see God over and over, even the Old Testament, he bends so low to work with men on men's terms. He comes and works with us on our terms. And so this was the kind of space we saw was beginning to form. A space where artists could come and ask questions and study the Bible and say, just be in like-minded community together. Flannery O'Connor said a good novelist is a realist of distances. And I think that sometimes the artist in a congregation can feel maybe they're too negative. I don't know if you don't have to raise your hand, but if you've ever felt like, I just think I'm just too negative. If you're in an environment that is like maybe emphasizing uplift, and isn't making room for that lament, you might think, what's wrong with me? And I would just say, nothing is wrong with you. We are realists of distances. We can see where we are, and we can see with prophetic imagination how it could possibly be. What a good thing that could unfold in our communities. I'm a big fan of practical theology for this reason. I know that the importance of refining a doctrine, those doctrinal things, I'm not taking away from the merit of that. But practical theology is so exciting to me, because it's when people go to their Creator God and say, I'm all out, I'm tapped out of ideas. I'm up against this huge issue. And I've heard that you're a God that creates, and you're a God that makes, and that sees, and is good, and will you give me some good ideas? And you see these people engaging in a way that is bringing out the prophetic imagination for that community, and is bringing that forth as we speak. But we can only do that when we think about the whole of humanity and our experience. The other thing we run into, I think sometimes that can be limiting, is utility and pragmatism, and Makoto Fujimura has talked about this at length. But utility and pragmatism, he says, has infected every institution, and maybe primarily the church. utility and pragmatism says if it is useful, it is good. Usefulness equals good. And this leaves out a whole bunch of people that I think Jesus wants to know, and it leaves out a lot of ways of being in church and being confessional that are, I think, healing and helpful for people that are coming in, wanting to experience Christian community. So a lot of times churches don't know how to engage artists unless it's at a really pragmatic level. If what you're doing really serves what we are doing up here, and if it's really in line with our message, then we know, like, if you can make a flyer for us or do something here, or, then we know what to do with you. And a lot of churches don't really know what to do with artists that are creating visual arts and doing these things outside of that space, outside of that mission. And I would say that I recently spoke at a pastor's conference at Duke Divinity, and I was encouraging them to see the artists in their community as playing a role in the whole. They are your canaries in the coal mine. They are the sensitive ones. They are the ones that are able to sort of open up dialogue that might need to happen. I think sometimes a pastor's up here and they don't really know what's happening out there. And what do we need to address and what do we need to talk about? And I think your artists are reflecting on life in a way that can be useful. So Mako says, we follow not that utility and pragmatic mindset. As artists, we lean into what God does, which is extravagant and wasteful. He is extravagant and wasteful. And when he does, like, for instance, he says, I want you to take all of Sabbath off. This is an invitation into an extravagant space. He's inviting us into rest, and he's inviting us into these places. When, Mako is a abstract artist. When he mixes his paints, he is, in spending hours working on his art. We all know we have to create these spaces that feel like, is this a waste of time? Is this a waste of time that I'm doing this? And I would say, no, lean into that. That's something of Sabbath in there, and there's something of that extravagant and wasteful space. Jesus comes to Mary and Martha when Lazarus has died, and Martha comes and very pragmatically asks a pragmatic question, and Jesus gives her a very reasonable answer. And then Mary comes up to him, and we know she's kind of the feeler, right? And she comes up to him and she says the exact same thing Martha says. And Jesus weeps. He weeps with her. He enters into this moment. Mako says, when I mix my paints to do my work, I imagine that the tears of Christ are still with us. From what we understand about how the world works, those tears, the tears of God, fell to the ground, evaporated up into the air, and are still with us, are still a part of our world. He brought himself here, again, to be a part of our humanity. So when we pump up into that utility and pragmatism, it's not that we, don't play well with others and aren't part of like teams and things like that. But are we making space for artists that are asking questions and are ruminating on the different aspects of faith, that someone else, when they walk in and see that piece or hear that thing, will feel, okay, there might be space for me here. There might be space for me here because you have opened up a part of your humanity to me. Then I think as a human, I might be able to come here. I might be able to see this. Our pastor we have a gallery in our front door. You walk in our front door and there's a gallery there, and it features artists, and he calls it a threshold. You're kind of walking, you're leaving your daily life, and that space, that art space, creates sort of a threshold that you cross over. Now we're going to learn and worship and do these things, enter into these things, but in the context of our humanness and what we're bringing into that space. The other thing I think can really limit our creativity is what I call directives. And that was when Charlie was first working with me, I had a lot of directives, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but in the movie WALL-E, you guys remember WALL-E? Wally is, just the sweetest little guy going around doing his job and crunching down his trash and making his little piles. And then Eva comes into his life. And they kind of are beginning to form this friendship. And there is a humanness to it in that they're becoming friends. And one of these sandstorms comes, and she, or before that, sorry, Eva is there obviously for a purpose. And as soon as she detects the green plant, she goes into directive mode. And she shuts down, and she closes off, and Wally is left. He's out there trying to hold her hand, draping lights on her, making his little cooing sounds, playing music for her. He's trying to make a connection, but she's gone into directive mode. And I think sometimes we're not aware that we have these. We have these little things where when someone says this, then I need to say these things. And we can sometimes become, again, less human when we do that. We go into, if someone says a certain thing, I know I grew up that way. That if someone says this thing, this is my opportunity to, must give this verse from Romans, And we can lose a little bit of our, just the ability to say that, something like, that's really hard, isn't it? I'm so sorry that happened to you. We can go into those directive modes. And I think when we're trying to create, this creeps in as well. We can sometimes feel like that we're trying to be propaganda for God, or that, what is the faithful thing to say? I think I started out early saying, what is the faithful thing to say? What do you want me to say? And I feel like my best songs have come not from, tell me what you want me to say, more from him saying, what's going on down there? What are you experiencing? Tell me about it. Nope, you just glossed over that. Tell me about all of it. Tell me more about that. I want you to lean into that. I want you to write about that because there are more people out there who have that experience. So I don't want you to just write what you think is faithful. I want you to write about what's happening to you and to tell the truth about it, to talk about it. And part of that truth is that he bends low to be with me. That is part of the truth. Charlie said all the time, God is the ocean and we keep writing about a cup of water. God is the ocean and we keep writing about a cup of water. Gerard Manley Hopkins in As Kingfishers Catch Fire talks about this as well. He says, Christ plays in 10,000 places. We, each of us, have a way of being in the world, and I hope what you're hearing and what I'm saying is, when we become mindful of the things that are making us close up or feel these restrictions that we might have learned somewhere back there, God, I think, is inviting you to be creative like he is creative. And that is a very fluid and no-holds-barred creativity. And I think he wants to hear the whole of your experience, not just the praiseworthy stuff. I think he also wants to hear about the harder things. And I think part of naming the hard stuff, I know I've written a lot of songs about my marriage. When I name something hard in my marriage, that has helped me grow and move into a different place with it when I've been able to name that. So I want to close with a story. Art House these days, we have a square dance every year. We have a theater company that operates out of there. We do 3-4 plays a year. We have a theater camp. We do songwriter feedback groups. Charlie always said there's not a good elevator speech for the Art House because it's a lot of things. It's a lot of people bringing their dreams under the umbrella of creative community for the common good. But the metaphor, the mobilizing metaphor for all of the work that we're doing there comes from this story that Charlie told me, and I keep going back to this because that's the beginning of my journey, is pulling up to the art house in Nashville. And I was working on my second record, and I was working with words, and I just felt very discouraged. I had been learning about all kinds of different things in the world, and I was beginning to hear about the work of IJM and combating human trafficking. I've been an artist advocate for them for a long time, but my heart was just being broken about these things, and I thought, I'm just working with creativity, words, ideas, and I need to go be a nurse. I pass out at the sight of blood, but I think I could do it. I need to be a lawyer. I need to do something that's more hands-on, more meaningful. And Charlie said, have you heard the story of the cellist of Sarajevo? The cellist of Sarajevo, Vilan Smilovic, was living in an apartment above a square where men, women, and children would line up for bread. And during the Bosnian War, a stray bomb from the fighting fell on the square, and his apartment was just upstairs from that. And in his grief and loss, not just for that, but for everything that had been happening in his country, he put on his full tux and took his cello, and he set up in the remains of the bomb crater that had been that piazza, that square. And he began to play this beautiful adagio. And he played, 22 people had been killed in this day, in this one instance. He began playing all over Bosnia, sometimes in really dangerous places. He would play this beautiful adagio, sometimes under the threat of sniper fire or being actually very close to conflict. And Charlie said, some people say that this protest of beauty hastened the end of the war because the world was so drawn to this protest of beauty and this thing that he was doing, that he was putting into this place. And Charlie said, it's really easy to stand at the edge of a crater and to talk about how deep it is and how it got there and whose fault it is and all the things about it. And he said, it takes a generative person to climb down into that crater and play a song, put something into the world that, what would you want to hear? What would we want to hear in that crater? And that became such a mobilizing metaphor for me because I immediately saw, this is what Jesus does. This is the gospel. He comes down from what we understand is a really perfect place, and he enters a bomb crater that he didn't make. He enters into other people's pain, and he goes down in, and we want a march, we want other kinds of songs, and he plays the gospel, the very gospel. And it's in everything he does. It's in his friendships and the way he calls out and heals and all the things he's doing. He's playing this beautiful song up out of this place, out of this. And I realized I have craters all around me. We don't have to go far to find craters. You are near different craters than I am near. And I just had this longing. I want my work to be a song in a bomb crater. I want to enter into the stories of other people, if I did it or not, or am part of it or not. I want to enter into those places. I want to ask a very creative God to help me be creative, to communicate the whole picture of what we're doing, of what just happened to us here. Help me communicate in a way that takes in the reality of the wounding, brings in the reality of healing, the peacemaking, that is a part of that process, that stays in that crater and builds something and makes something. And each one of you will make something different in that bomb crater. A generative person climbs in and says, what would I put here? And for us, our song was Art House North. That was our song. We wanted to be in our neighborhood, having conversations about what just happened to us, and how do we process this, and how can we let this change our lives as we move forward and help us lean into the kingdom imagination. How can we awaken the kingdom imagination in other people that is always there, always there to be seen and accessed. And so that's the story of what we've been doing up in St. Paul with our art house. And I hope I haven't made it too out there. I don't know. I want to pray for us, if that's okay, along these lines, because I don't know where you are. Actually, how many of you are musicians? Will you just raise your hand if you're a musician? Okay. How many of you are in theater? Okay. How many of you are visual artists? Any? All right. How many of you are writers? Okay. All right. Lord, do you see this room and all these hearts? And Lord, we just pray that all this meandering set of ideas and walking down roads that I've just done, Lord, I pray that you'd be the spark to show us a way forward as artists, ways that our wiring to question and to wonder and to want to seek out the truth, that we would be a benefit to our communities. I pray that in our art we would name deeper and deeper things about ourselves, about the God we serve, about the work of Christ on earth. Lord, I pray that we would not have compartments of things. I pray that you would be in it all. I pray that you would be in it all. I pray that you would inspire us, Lord, the Lord of ideas, the Lord of creativity. I pray you'd help us to remember when we go to sit down at the page that we're not alone in that. I pray that we would say a word of prayer, that you would help us, that you would give us just a small vision of your exceeding, boundless vision. So, Lord, I pray that out of this room, good things would come, beautiful things, restorative things, healing things. I pray that words will be sung and written, that paintings will be painted and plays will be performed. And I pray that we'll look back at this time as a nexus for a new beginning and a new birth of creativity. Pray for every heart here as well, in whatever they're facing in their daily world, whatever human things they're coming in contact with. Lord, be with us, be in it all. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you.